I pushed open the front door, the familiar creak greeting me, but something felt wrong. The air smelled of wet paint, sharp and artificial. My heart thudded as I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When I turned into the hall, I froze. There, in my master bedroom, Devin stood with a roller in his hand, paint dripping down in bright, sugary streaks. Paige perched on a step stool, her hair pulled back, humming as if she were decorating her own nursery. The walls I had chosen, carefully painted in a calm gray that made me feel steady, were being smothered in garish pink. "Perfect for us when we move in," Devin said without looking up, smirking like it was already settled. Paige laughed, brushing paint along the trim. "This room will be so much brighter once we're done." For a moment, I couldn't move. My throat tightened. That room had been mine alone, the one place I allowed myself peace after years of sacrifice. I had chosen every detail with care. The rug under the bed was the one I bought the year after I paid off the mortgage. The dresser in the corner still carried faint scratches from when Devin was a boy, running toy cars along its surface. And now, without a word to me, they had decided it was theirs. "What are you doing?" My voice came out sharper than I expected. Devin finally turned, casual, like I had interrupted him watching TV. "We're updating it. You'll thank us later." Paige dipped her brush again, not even glancing my way. "It's about time this place got some energy." Something snapped in me then. I felt it in my chest, cold and certain. This wasn't just redecorating. This was a claim, a quiet eraser of me in my own house. I stood straighter, letting the silence stretch until Paige lowered her brush. "This is my room," I said evenly, "and you're going to stop now." They exchanged a look, Devin rolling his eyes as if I were being dramatic. But in that look, I caught something more, an assumption that I would bend the same way I always had. Not this time. I hadn't always lived in confrontation. For years, my mornings began with the steady comfort of coffee on the porch, steam curling into the cool air while the sun broke over the trees. The garden just beyond the steps was my pride. Rows of tomatoes, herbs, and flowers I coaxed to life with patient hands. Inside, my favorite chair waited, angled toward the window, where I could read in the quiet, the light falling just right across the pages. After decades of rushing, of hospital shifts that blurred into one another, I had finally built a rhythm that belonged only to me. I thought of the years before this piece, long nights in scrubs, the sting of disinfectant on my skin, the way my legs ached as I walked home after 12 hours on my feet. I had sold my wedding ring to pay for Devin's tuition. I had skipped meals so he wouldn't miss out on sports trips or uniforms. When he was sick, I held his hand through the night and still went to work in the morning, pretending the weight in my chest wasn't exhaustion, but determination. Every sacrifice had been for him. I believed that was what love was, giving until there was nothing left, trusting that someday he would understand. For a while, I told myself he did. When he graduated, when he smiled at me with pride, I thought the ledger balanced, but now, standing in that pink-smeared room, I saw something else in his eyes. Not gratitude, not love, ownership. He looked at my home the way a buyer looks at a property listing, calculating, expectant. Paige only reinforced it with her laughter, the kind that dismissed me as if I were a guest, overstaying my welcome. I walked out of the bedroom that day, my heart hammering, and sat in my chair by the window. But the light didn't fall the same. The coffee tasted bitter. The house no longer felt like sanctuary. It felt like a prize they were circling. And the next time we gathered at dinner, Devin made it clear that circling had turned into a plan. We were seated around the table as if it were any other evening, plates, filled glasses clinking. Devin leaned back in his chair, speaking with that casual tone he used when he wanted something but didn't want to ask outright. "We'll stay here for a while," he said, cutting into his food like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Our apartment is cramped, and you have all this space." I set my fork down. My voice stayed even, steady the way it always did when I knew I couldn't afford to waver. "No, this is my home. You need to build your own." For a moment, silence hung between us. Paige's eyes flicked up, sharp and cold. "Selfish!" she snapped, her words like a slap. "You've got rooms sitting empty, and you'd rather let them gather dust than help your own family." I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my tone calm. "Empty rooms don't mean they're yours. You chose your life together. You chose your apartment. That responsibility belongs to you, not me." Devin tried to laugh, but the sound was forced. He forced a grin, shaking his head like I was being difficult. "Come on, Mom. You always overthink. We'd be helping each other. You'd have us close by, and we'd have the space we need. It makes sense." But his eyes gave him away. There was no warmth in them, no trace of the boy who once clung to my hand. They were sharp, calculating already, imagining what they would take once I gave an inch. I picked up my fork again, refusing to feed the argument further. "I've made my decision," I said, quiet, but final. Paige muttered something under her breath, her mouth tight with disdain. Devin didn't push again. Not then. But the way he glanced at her told me this wasn't the end of it, and later that night, I realized how far they were willing to go when I overheard their whispered voices in the hallway. The house was quiet that night, the kind of silence I used to treasure. I had turned off the lights, settled into bed, with the intent of reading a few pages before sleep, when faint voices drifted down the hall. At first I thought it was the television, but as I listened, I realized the words were hushed, deliberate, too careful to be casual conversation. I slipped from bed, padding softly to the door. Their voices grew clearer as I moved closer to the hallway. Devin's tone was low but distinct, carrying that same mix of arrogance and confidence he'd used at dinner. "Don't worry," he whispered. "She'll give in. Once she signs the papers, the deed will be ours." My stomach dropped. Paige let out a sharp little laugh, muffled but cruel. "I told you she always folds. We just have to push at the right moment." I gripped the door frame, the weight of their words pressing down on me. This wasn't about staying for a while. This wasn't about helping family or filling empty rooms. They weren't just circling my home. They were plotting to take it, to erase me from it completely. For a moment, rage surged hot and fast. I wanted to fling the door open, confront them both, scream until my throat went raw. But I didn't move. I forced myself to breathe through the fire in my chest, to hold still in the shadows. Out-shouting them would only prove their point that I was weak, emotional, incapable of reason. No, I would not give them that satisfaction. I stepped back into my room, closing the door softly behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, pulse hammering, mind racing. They thought I was predictable, someone who would bend until I broke. But I had survived harder things than betrayal, and if they wanted a war for this house, they had just declared it. By morning, the resolve had hardened inside me. I knew I needed to prepare, because the next move would not be whispered. Sleep would not come. I lay staring at the ceiling, their voices echoing in my head, every word cutting deeper than the last. My hand drifted to the nightstand, where my jewelry box used to sit, the one that once held my wedding ring. I remembered the day I pawned it. Standing in that dim shop, the clerk weighing the gold like it was nothing more than metal. I told myself it was worth it, that a ring could be replaced. But Devin's education could not. I thought of the years that followed, of the retirement fund I had once built slowly and carefully. I drained it so he could afford his first condo, believing it would give him stability, a foundation for his adult life. I told myself it was an investment in his future, a mother's duty to make sure her child had a place to belong. But the ink hadn't even dried on the papers before he began asking for more. The sharpest memories, though, were not about money. They were of nights spent in quiet despair, holding him when the world had knocked him down. After a failed exam, a lost job, a breakup that shattered him, I was there, soothing, reassuring, carrying him until he could stand again. Each time, I told myself that love meant sacrifice, that my strength would be enough for both of us. And each time, I got back up the next morning and worked harder, carrying his weight along with mine. But now, in the stillness of my bedroom, I saw it differently. Each sacrifice had not lifted him higher. It had only taught him that I would always give, always bleed, a little more so he didn't have to. He hadn't learned resilience, he had learned entitlement. A hollow ache filled my chest as I whispered into the dark, "Did I raise a man, or did I create someone who only knows how to take?" The thought lingered sharp as glass as I rose the next morning and walked into a house that no longer felt entirely mine, and that was when I found the invasion had already begun. The front door was unlocked when I came home that afternoon. My chest tightened instantly. Something was wrong. I stepped inside and froze at the sight of my dresser and nightstand shoved into the hallway, drawers half open, socks spilling out like they had been dragged without care. My lamps, the ones I'd chosen after finally paying off the house, sat crooked against the wall. The sound of laughter floated from upstairs, followed by the scraping of rollers against drywall. My heart pounded as I climbed the steps 2 at a time. When I reached the doorway of my bedroom, the air smelled of paint again, thick and sickly sweet. They're trying to repaint my room again, once more. 2 men I didn't recognize stood with rollers in hand, coating my walls in that same garish pink. Paige turned as if she were welcoming me into her home, not mine. "We're making it ours," she said brightly, her smile too wide. "You'll adjust." The words tore something open inside me. All the quiet, all the patience, all the silence I had swallowed came crashing out at once. "Stop!" My voice cracked through the room. The workers froze mid-stroke, glancing uneasily at each other. "Put the rollers down now. This is my house, and you have no right to be here." Devin stepped forward, face tightening. "Mom, you're overreacting. We're just helping. It needs to be updated." "Get out." I jabbed a finger toward the door, shaking but steady. "All of you, out of my house." The workers didn't wait for him to argue. They gathered their tools quickly, slipping past me without meeting my eyes. Paige muttered something under her breath, but the smile was gone. Devin lingered a moment longer, jaw clenched, before storming past me down the stairs. The silence afterward felt deafening. I stood in the doorway of my half-ruined bedroom, staring at streaks of pink cutting across the gray walls I had chosen so carefully. That night, I called a locksmith. Every lock on every door was changed, and as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trembling but resolute, I knew I couldn't wait for them to return. I had to be ready. The morning after the invasion, I didn't waste time. My hands still trembled as I dialed the security company, the words spilling out sharper than I intended. "I want cameras all around the house, alarms, motion sensors, every door, every window." The man on the line promised they could send a team the same day. When the van pulled up, I watched from the porch as the technicians unloaded boxes of equipment. Every drill into the siding, every wire snaked along the frame, felt like armor being fastened around me. By the afternoon, I had an app on my phone that showed every corner of my property. I tested each alarm, each sensor, listening to the piercing siren until I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. It wasn't peace, not really, but it was something close. I could breathe without feeling like someone might slip through my door at any moment. Still, the ache lingered. Standing in the yard, I looked at the grass where Devin once ran barefoot as a boy, his laughter chasing fireflies into the night. That memory pressed against the one burned fresh into me, his smirk as he painted over my walls, claiming them as his own. I tried to reconcile those 2 images, the child I raised and the man who now saw me as nothing more than an obstacle, but they blurred together until I could no longer separate them. That evening, I sat in my chair by the window, phone in hand, watching the camera feeds flicker in real time. It felt strange, this power to see everything outside while holding myself inside. A fortress, yes, but one that reminded me how much I had already lost. When the house finally went quiet, I made myself a promise. I would not be blindsided again. And 2 days later, when my phone buzzed with an alert I hadn't expected, I realized just how necessary that promise was. It was late morning when my phone buzzed with a sharp alert. I almost ignored it, thinking it was a squirrel or a passing car, but the word motion glared across the screen. My hand tightened as I opened the app. There he was, Devin, standing at my front door. His shoulders hunched as he pulled a key from his pocket, sliding it into the lock as if nothing had changed. I held my breath, watching him twist and jiggle it. His face pinched with frustration when it refused to turn. The camera caught everything: the way he glanced over his shoulder, the nervous twitch in his jaw, the impatience growing with each failed attempt. Then he disappeared out of frame. When he came back, my chest turned to stone. He was holding a crowbar. I gasped so loud I startled myself. On the screen, my own son wedged cold steel between the doorframe and the lock, shoving hard, his teeth clenched. The alarm shrieked, lights flashing in the video feed. Devin stumbled back, eyes wide, before bolting to his car. In seconds, he was gone, leaving the crowbar tossed in the grass. I sat frozen for a long moment, the phone slippery in my hand. Then instinct took over. I saved the footage, copied it twice, and grabbed my keys. The drive to the police station blurred my vision, swimming, but I walked in steady. "I want to file a report," I said, placing the phone on the counter. "Attempted break-in. I have video proof." The officer's expression hardened as he watched. Devin's face was clear, his actions undeniable. The report was taken, the evidence logged. That night, back at home, I sat in the dark with a cup of coffee gone cold. The sobs came slowly, deep and raw, not just for the door he tried to break, but for the bond I knew I had just shattered. By the next evening, the phone calls began, his voice no longer calm or entitled, but desperate. The call came from the police before nightfall. Devin had been picked up. The words struck me with a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. My son, my only child, sitting in a cell because I had chosen to protect myself. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the silent phone, waiting for it to begin. And it didn't take long. The first ring was Paige, her voice shrill and frantic. "Josephine, please, you have to drop the charges. Devin didn't mean it. He was just frustrated. We'll leave you alone. I swear, just fix this before it ruins his life." I listened, silent. She kept talking, words tumbling over themselves until I finally spoke. "No, not unless I have your promise. No more keys, no more surprises, no more schemes. You stay out of my house, out of my business, and away from me." There was silence on the other end. For once, she had nothing clever to say. Then Devin's voice came hours later, raw and desperate from the jail phone. "Mom, please, I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I'll never do it again. Just tell them you want to withdraw. I'll walk away. I'll leave you alone, please." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to remain steady. "I'll withdraw only if you mean every word. You leave me in peace. No more attempts, no more lies. If you break that promise, I won't protect you again." He breathed heavily, then fell quiet. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Then finally, "Fine, I agree." The next morning, I returned to the station and signed the paperwork to withdraw my complaint. Devin was released later that day. When I came home, the house was quiet. For the first time in months, there was no laughter echoing down the hall, no smell of paint invading my bedroom, no threats hanging in the air. And in that silence, I felt the weight of what I had traded, family for peace, as I turned toward the life waiting for me behind my locked doors. The months that followed unfolded with a quiet I hadn't known in years. No more pounding on the door, no phone buzzing at midnight with demands or insults. The silence stretched, not heavy this time, but light, like air finally moving through a room that had been sealed shut. I heard bits and pieces about Devin and Paige through family. A cousin stopped me at the grocery store, speaking gently, as if she weren't sure I wanted to hear. Paige is pregnant. They're barely scraping by, moving from one short lease to the next, always behind on bills. I nodded, offering no judgment, only the briefest of polite words. Inside, I felt nothing but relief. Their struggle was no longer mine to shoulder. Each morning, I found myself reclaiming the life they had tried to take. I planted new rows in the garden, pulling weeds until my hands ached, then standing back to admire the green pushing through the soil. I repainted the kitchen a shade of soft cream that caught the morning light just right. And every evening, I returned to my master bedroom. The walls, once again, the calm gray I had chosen, the color that made me feel steady. The pink was gone. erased as if it had never existed. Sometimes, as I sat with a book in my lap, I would think of Devon as a little boy, his laughter filling this same house. The ache of those memories was still there, but softer now, no longer sharp enough to wound me. I let the memories come and go like visitors I no longer feared. One evening, I stood at the window overlooking the yard, coffee cooling in my hands, and whispered to the empty room, "I chose myself, and I'd do it again." The words settled into the walls, into the garden, into every corner of the house I had fought to keep. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at home, not just in the house, but in my own life.